Good afternoon, it's Friday the 6th of October 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host Brian Gerrish, with me in the studio Mike Robinson. We're delighted to be joined today by David Scott with Northern Exposure. Of course, David reporting from north of the border. Well, here in Plymouth the sun is shining, there's a blue sky, there's a nip of autumn in the air. Everything looks okay, but we know that under the surface of British politics, it is certainly not okay.
Harriett Baldwin, the Defence Minister for Procurement, was in Poland yesterday, and she was increasing Britain's defence cooperation with other countries, and also promoting what UK companies, defence companies, have to offer to Poland. So here she is on screen. Ministry of Defence tweeting that out today. So I thought, well, okay, let's see if I can get a bit more background on this. Certainly nothing from the Ministry of Defence itself in terms of a press release. Maybe mainstream media has something on this. And so I had a look, and I've chosen Google because that seems to be
what other people use.
Absolutely. Well, no mention of it at all, Brian. It seems very, very strange. I wonder why that could be.
I would say the main reason is that we've got to the situation, Mike, where the government and government departments simply decide what they wish to release to the public and what they don't. And a little bit later, I'm going to be talking about the Ministry of Defence covering up material which they certainly didn't want the public to know about.
Well, thank you to Linda Taylor, because the first reply to that tweet from the Ministry of Defence was from her, and with a nice graphic from the UK Column website, so that's very good. More news on this subject, but this is old news, although it was only released today, so that fits in very well with what you just said, Brian, because this took place on the 21st of June this year at the Paris Air Show, and this is the Defence Safety Authority Chief Technical Officer Rear Admiral Rick Thompson, who signed the Le Bourget Memorandum on behalf of the Military Aviation Authority. This is a French Direction de la Sûreté Aéronautique d'État. Okay.
Coup d'etat, I think is the...
And it improves apparently the efficiency of recognition of other military airworthiness authorities, and it minimises the amount of interactions between the various military airworthiness authorities. And they say that it is an intent for deeper defence cooperation across participating nations in order to increase the output of defence spending and optimise the use of national resources to enhance the level of safety in military air operations. And nations that participated include Austria, Belgium, Czech Republic, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Hungary, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Spain, Sweden, and the UK, also Australia, but mainly European countries. So that's more defence coordination, cooperation, unification taking place under our noses. But for some reason, the Ministry of Defence felt they should wait for 4 or 5 months before they announced it.
And it's done at the Paris Air Show as if this was some sort of little couple of commercial companies taking their people to Paris Air Show, a few glasses of champagne and some crab sandwiches, and then they signed the deal. So now we've got the British government hiding major strategic decisions from the public by taking it to Paris Air Show. And of course, in 2010, it was UK Column exposing the fact that a charity, the Franco-British Council, was used to facilitate meetings where Britain's defence was to be carved up with the French.
But it's not all bad news, Brian. There is some good news.
Okay.
And here we go. The F-35 is one step closer. The F-35, of course, the Lightning II, it's, according to the Ministry of Defence, the world's most advanced fifth-generation aircraft, and the Royal Air Force and Royal Navy will jointly operate it from both land and sea. It's going to form an integral part of the UK carrier strike capability from both Queen Elizabeth-class aircraft carriers. But this is fantastic news because the runway intersection at RAF Marham, the resurfacing has been completed. And so we can ignore the fact that the F-35 tries to kill its pilots by randomly switching off the oxygen supply. We can ignore the fact that it has 276 deficiencies in combat performance, which are considered critical to correct.
A little bit of corrosion.
We can ignore the fact that the electro-optical targeting system is so low resolution and its range is so short that it basically doesn't work. And we can ignore the fact that the cannon doesn't work, because in order to maintain its stealth mode, the F-35 has a door to conceal the gun, and once you open the door, it unfortunately pulls the aircraft off target, so the cannon doesn't work. There are fatigue problems, as you just mentioned, particularly in the tail section. The arresting gear on the F-35A variant is only good for one landing. The excessive airflow, excessive high temperature around the engines, excessive violent vertical oscillations during F-35C catapult launches. None of this matters, because some tarmac at an airfield has been resurfaced, so it's all fine and nothing to see here, Brian.
Mike, this is exactly the same style as the carriers arriving, because of course the first thing we were told was that Britain had managed to dredge Portsmouth Harbour in order to get the aircraft carriers in. We were more interested in the amount of dredging that had gone on and how well we dredged the harbour than the aircraft carrier arriving with no aircraft. So at the moment, this is complete dross and nonsense being pushed out to the British public. And the British public has got to start seeing through this propaganda by the British government, because the objective is to carve up Britain's military in order to bring in EU military unification. And how big is the carve up? Well, let's get into it, because mainstream press are talking about it, but of course under the surface most of the information is coming through so-called social media. Here we've got Navy Lookout, shocking news. Daily Mail says ocean survey ship HMS Scott to be sold, and they say presumably without replacement.
But that can't be true, because Michael Fallon says the Royal Navy is growing.
I think he's been telling porky pies.
Right.
So the real story with HMS Scott is a few months ago, this ship broke down mid-Atlantic. I am told that one of the diesel engines came close to, we'll say, exploding, but that's a bit dramatic, but there was a major breakdown. And this ship has never gone to sea since. But I understand that many service personnel were told that, of course, they had to carry on working on board the ship, tied up in harbour, as if there was nothing wrong. So this was a deliberate deception by the Ministry of Defence. And of course, what would have taken place is a major inspection of the damage. Oh dear, this is too expensive and too embarrassing to replace. So the ship is sold. And why has this occurred? This has occurred because the Royal Navy, and this is the pattern across the military, the highly experienced technicians, the non-commissioned officers in particular, the people that operate equipment and get ships to sea, get tanks operational, they have been cut to the bone. So the expertise is no longer available. So a complete lie from the Ministry of Defence about what's been going on with that ship. But here's the news. Royal Navy could lose beach landing ships in the next round of defence cuts. And if we follow that through, we've got the UK Defence Journal here pointing out that HMS Ocean just had, I think it was £81 million spent on it in a refit, that's going to go as well. So 3 major warships, and as Devon Life and the BBC are now talking about, 1,000 Royal Marines to go as well. But the clue to this is that caption on the photograph, the decommissioning of HMS Ocean without replacement, strategically nonsensical. No. This is complete sense, in a strategic sense, as far as the government's concerned, because to make Britain dependent on all these other nationalities, you have to first of all decimate our military, so we're incapable of producing our own equipment, and we are then to be drawn into this viper's nest of arrangements which you're detailing with this new arrangement at the Paris Air Show, Mike, where we are dependent on a unified military, European military structure, and that is a unified procurement and build structure. So to make this unified EU system work, first of all, the government had to cut Britain's military to the bone, and that is what they're doing.
Of course, it's all happening under the noise of the continuing Brexit issues. And at the heart of this, I believe, is this furore over Theresa May. I do wonder how much of the speech that she made the other day, how much of the fallout from that has been sort of generated by the media in order to try and create more chaos within the Tory party. Grant Shapps now saying that he has 30 colleagues who want to see Theresa May go, including some ex-cabinet ministers. And of course, this gives the impression that she's weak, which she is. And then we get the news from Reuters here: prepare now for over-the-cliff Brexit. German industry says. This is the Federation of German Industries, who say that Theresa May's sort of lacking a clear strategy, that she's weak, that they're going to end up with a hard Brexit. It's not going to be anything of the kind, because of course what will happen is that as this chaos continues and so-called negotiations continue to fail, the transition period will get longer. It's going to extend. It was 2 years. But Theresa May says 2 years, Boris Johnson says 2 years, Philip Hammond says 4 years. How many years is it going to be? It could be 10 years. And if you remember back to the really early discussions about Brexit, that's exactly what they were saying at that time, that, oh yes, the Lisbon Treaty, Article 50 period may only be 2 years, but the actual period of transition may be 10 years, and all kinds of ills can be hidden under that kind of timescale, and particularly hidden under the headlines of this type of generated chaos?
Well, Mike, you in particular, but certainly UK column has pushed out from the beginning that there was to be no Brexit. It was a psychological operation, Brexit without the exit. We were laughed at by many people. There was snorts of derision from several different sources that this was complete nonsense. There'd been this decisive vote. We were coming out of the European Union. Of course, Nigel Farage from UKIP stood on the stage and said, "We won, it's all over." We said consistently, this is complete nonsense. There is no Brexit, and now we can see it.
We can see it happening. Let's bring David Scott in at this point. David, what are your thoughts on what we've just reported?
A few things. First, on the sort of pan-national coordination, unification of defence procurement, replacing the sort of national endeavour. We have in the F-35 an example of the complexity of a modern aircraft. The jet engines and airframes are extremely complex. The technical demands are vastly high, and that shows the decisions to scrap very excellent British designs and other designs over the years to be utter folly. You have the Avro Arrow from Canada, which was set to be a world beater. You have the TSR-2, and of course Harrier, all of which have been sent to the junkyard or cancelled, and were excellent aircraft. And these things worked. These things were maintaining our own ability to design and construct. All that's been given away, and what we've got for it isn't too good.
No, it isn't. Now, David, over the last couple of years, we've been highlighting the issues with British economy, British productivity, and it continues to tank, really. This is the latest graph from the Office for National Statistics on British productivity. And what it's really showing is that the wide separation between the trend that was building from 1994 to 2007, 2008, and what has happened since. But some people would say that this is possibly linked to the so-called Great Recession and the banking collapse. But David, it's got to be linked to the general picture with regard to policy and productivity, manufacturing, and the economy in general. This is not by accident. This is happening. It is a policy decision that has caused this to happen.
Well, malinvestment is key, because that's what wrecks the economy. You have resources placed in unproductive areas, in areas which aren't required, and the imbalances stack up. what happened in 2008 should have been an enormous correction. There was no correction made. Banks were bailed out. They should have been allowed to go bust. There should have been a huge flight of people out of financial services into making real things, because that was the correction that was needed. That's what the economy was trying to do, and it was prevented from doing so. And when you do these things, when you have government intervention of this type, the malinvestment simply stacks up. The problem is the can is kicked down the road. The problems build and build and build, and you get the graph you illustrate there, which shows the economy flatlining. And productivity is key, because if we want to have a better life, if we want to consume more, we have to produce more. That's the only way it works.
Well, I mean, I accept what you're saying there, but the key point here is that the ONS saying that UK labour productivity continued to lag behind international partners. They suggest that lower level of productivity was evident across all industries, although the size of the gap widens considerably. But what they're saying that output per hour in the UK was 15.1% below the average for the rest of the G7 in 2016. It was 9% below the rate in Italy, 22% below the US, and 22% lower than in France, and 25.6% lower than in Germany. So there must be something additional going on here.
Well, perhaps. I mean, the difficulty in determining what this is the complex nature of the economy. It's enormously complex. There are so many moving parts. So one aspect, particularly compared to, say, the likes of Germany, is lack of investment. I mean, capital investment's not going into industry. It's going into speculative ventures. It's going into housing. It's going into a whole lot of other things that don't make goods. And that's a problem, and that has a huge effect. You've got the human resources being misdirected as well, and you also have a large influx of people who are sort of at the bottom end of the skills, the skills range. Why that sudden change in 2008 is actually quite difficult to see exactly what that's caused by. If it's been an intentional decision, I wouldn't know what it was.
Okay, well, we'll do more research on that then. Now let's move on to Russia. And I've been talking about the hysteria over the Zapad 2017 military exercises, which continue. Brian, another article here this time from The Drive. This is the war zone section of that website. Russia breaks into US soldiers' iPhones in apparent hybrid warfare attacks. It's shocking. Apparently, they say the US Army's asymmetric warfare group, tasked with finding ways to counter emerging threats, recently sounded the alarm about the dangers of Russia's hybrid warfighting concepts and warned that the US military as a whole might be ill-suited to responding to them in a crisis. And apparently, these nasty Russians were sitting over there in Belarus and attacking NATO troops in Poland and so on across the border. Absolutely shocking. Doesn't end there though, because this week the NATO Parliamentary Assembly is going on. Now the Parliamentary Assembly is where parliamentarians from NATO countries get together and have a good chinwag. And they're gathering this week apparently to assess challenges facing the alliance, including tense relations with Russia, security around the Black Sea, terror threats emanating from the Middle East, and new trends in information warfare, including hybrid warfare. Jens Stoltenberg will be there. I think he's giving his address this afternoon. And they say that lawmakers will renew the alliance's relations with Moscow in the wake of Russia's controversial Zapad military exercises in Belarus, close to NATO's borders in Poland and the Baltic states. And they're going to call for a continued commitment to determined allied deterrence posture against Russian provocations, including strong support for around 4,000 troops deployed on the eastern borders as part of NATO's enhanced forward presence. So not quite sure how those two paragraphs fit together, because they're going to they're going to review. I misread it. They're going to review it. They hate the Russians. They intend to start a war, I think.
Well, we can see all the pieces moving for that, Mike. But to say those nasty Russians have been working to hack into the phones of US servicemen, this is all part of what goes on in the world and has consistently gone on during and since the Cold War. The Americans do it. They've got specialist companies doing it. So this is complete nonsense.
Absolutely.
And the next bit coming up is nonsense. I've had a preview of the photo, of course.
Yes, this is fantastic. This is HMS Diamond, who's apparently fired her 4.5-inch main gun during an early morning gunnery exercise as part of NATO Response Force exercise Brilliant Mariner. Exercise Brilliant Mariner. I don't know who thought that name up.
It is brilliant. I think that is quite an interesting shot because I think there's a picture of the shell.
There is, absolutely.
There's a picture of the shell, so some pretty high-speed photography there. Carry on, I'll add a bit.
Well, this is 3 NATO standing groups participating in this year's exercise. It's taking place off the coast of France, Italy and Spain in the Mediterranean. Started on the 29th of September, finishes on the 13th of October. And the French Aero-Naval Rapid Reaction Force will assume responsibilities for the maritime component commander for NRF 2018. Now, this was released through Northwood, UK. So that would be the EU military headquarters. Indeed,
the structure's all there and ready to go. But we see this picture, so we've got a 4.5 gun being fired. Remember, of course, that it's already been reported publicly that the Royal Navy is not able to replace its Harpoon surface-to-surface missiles. It's also shortly not going to be able to replace the helicopter-launched Sea Skewer missiles, air-to-surface missile. We've got a generation of warships. I think HMS Diamond is one unable to work properly in warm water. We're getting rid of those major units, the amphibious carriers. We're getting rid of Royal Marines. So what can we show? Well, we can show a picture of a naval gun going off.
I suppose you should be grateful that it's not a stealth ship and they have to open a flap in order to fire the gun, which takes the gun off target.
Don't go there. We'll have a discussion about that in due course. Well, let's come on to home affairs. And I'd like to say thank you to the member of the public that alerted us to this sad occasion. It was an announcement of the Courts and Tribunals Judiciary that the Honourable Mrs. Justice Pauffley had retired. I think I'm correct in saying that I supported a family in front of this judge. I wasn't that impressed, Mike.
No, and I believe she was involved in the Holly Gregg case as well.
I believe she was. So I don't think I've ever been too impressed at this lady, but all of a sudden she's decided to sort of get out of the child protection, family court industry. Yeah. There we are. But on the subject of judges, here's the Times, and they're very big on the fact that to solve the whole of this nasty Edward Heath inquiry business, the former Director of Public Prosecution said, well, we need these horrible claims to be tested by a judge.
Maybe Judge Pauffley could do that.
Well, if she's just retired, she probably could, but we'll put her to one side. We'll park Judge Pauffley. We'll just say, isn't it interesting that the British public is to believe that if we've got a problem in the establishment, what do we need? We need to bring in a judge because they're absolutely honest. And they have never been in court themselves for interfering with children. They've never been involved in skullduggery and criminal activities. If they're a judge, we can trust them.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, the Times is wading in against Mike Veal and his report, Wiltshire Police report, Private Eye here. And this is a very interesting article because they're getting very, very upset that they discovered that the European Psychiatric Association had produced a report, the Satanist cult of Ted Heath, ethical implications of authority compromise. That sounds a pretty good headline to me. But of course, what Private Eye was doing here was attacking the testimony of SRA abuse victims. You picked this one up, David. This is pretty despicable stuff by the Times and Private Eye.
It certainly is. The article that the Private Eye was attacking refers to a well-known list that's in circulation of abusers, and comments that no indications were found that would throw the veracity of this document into doubt, and that's obviously annoyed certain people in the British establishment quite a lot, because this is a well-researched document that came out of the collected and collated and independently verified testimony of many survivors of Satanist ritual abuse. and people who are named on that list are only named if they've been identified by more than one survivor who are unconnected with one another. And in the case of Ted Heath, I think it was 5 survivors named Ted Heath. So this is the sort of quality of the victim testimony that's been looked at, and this document's been in the public realm for many years, and as this article comments, has never really come into any serious question or doubt.
Yeah, this will be the Rains list, I think, that you're commenting on.
Yes, that's correct.
Right,
yes.
okay. Well, let's carry on at this massive media attack. I called the Daily Mail myself this morning to protest at outrageous reporting. Look at the headline here, Ted Heath's victims in inverted commas. What an insult to child abuse survivors that the Daily Mail racks them up as victims, automatically leading people to think that they're false. And what do these people want? They don't want justice, they just want the money. This is the most despicable report, I think, that I've ever seen from the Daily Mail. But there's also just gross inaccuracies. We could say there's some lies in it. Let's have a look at what they're talking about. But they're ripping into everything. They are desperate to try and undermine this inquiry. One sub-box in the article entitled The Hoaxers, and they bring in Michael Shrimpton, who said would Heath killed children. They said that Wiltshire detectives also spoke to a convicted child sex abuser who said he was raped at the age of 12. And then what do? They bring Robert Green in again, who they say was jailed for harassing people he falsely accused of paedophilia. That is a complete lie, Mike.
Robert Green didn't accuse anybody.
That is absolutely correct. When I called the Daily Mail this morning, the young gentleman at their news desk was particularly offhand and unpleasant. And of course, there was nobody senior to talk to me. I had to send in my complaint by email. So that statement about Robert Green is absolutely untrue. He was not convicted for falsely accusing people of paedophilia. So this is a deliberate attempt to the paper, it would appear, to smear Chief Constable Mike Veal for his dedicated work. And who were the reporters involved? Bring in Rebecca. Well, I can't, because this lady is anonymous. She just doesn't seem to appear anywhere. So we're saying, who is this mysterious anonymous Daily Mail journalist, Rebecca Camber? We certainly can't find much on her. She's supposed to be a major crime investigator, but she doesn't seem to sort of exist in person, or she's too frightened to show her face. Well, she had a colleague. I'm going to call him the young Tom Paine, because here he is, and he's tweeting out, of course, the article. How old do you think he is, Mike?
18.
I don't want to be seen to sort of point a finger at people because they're young, but it is a fact that if you're investigating difficult subjects, experience on the ground counts. This man is just out of university. I know this one's difficult to read, but if you freeze this frame, you can have a look at it in your own time. Just have a look at his profile on LinkedIn, and you can find there's list after list of the fact that he's just been in graduate posts, and he's only been operating with the Mail for about a year, I think it is. So where is this man's experience? Southwest reporter for the Daily Mail. But I did happen to notice this little bit here, City University, London. Now, why is this important? Well, let's come on to another chunk of the Daily Mail's reporting today. Here we are, the police boss who still defends flawed inquiry. So the Daily Mail hasn't got the full information about the inquiry because that's only been released to the independent child abuse inquiry. Here's the next attack going in on Mike Veal. And they say this, yet despite his death in 2005, 2 years have been spent investigating the idea that the former Prime Minister was a predatory paedophile, a rapist of children who evaded suspicion for decades. What does it say? This fantastical hypothesis.
Sorry, this was a police investigation.
Yeah.
What is the Mail doing here? Is the Mail undermining every police investigation? So the police investigates a burglary or a rape or a murder. When this goes to court, is what's being presented in front of a jury a fantastical hypothesis?
Well,
or is it evidence-based?
According to the Daily Mail. Who's written this? Well, let's bring in this lady because we had her up on screen a little while ago. And I just want to follow through on this. I'm going to put a stamp over this. This is misleading journalism. Who is this lady? Well, she claims that she's an expert on SRA and she dismisses it. It's all nonsense. So this is the lead reporter and her name is Rosie Waterhouse. Here she is. And I encourage people to go and look at this for themselves so you can follow through what we're seeing. This is the document that she produced, a thesis or dissertation, Satanic Abuse, False Memories, Weird Belief and Moral Panics. So this lady just produced some documentation as part of a degree and she now claims she's an expert. But then where did she go on to become a director of Masters in Investigative Journalism, none other than the City University. And I think it's just a remarkable coincidence that we've got this woman who set herself up to know about this stuff, and we've got a young journalist who's trained there. David, I'm almost speechless at what the Daily Mail has done here. This is gutter journalism, and it's simply the Daily Mail saying, well, if you come forward saying that you've been abused, we, the Daily Mail, are going to laugh at you, because that's what they're doing in this article.
Indeed. One small correction. Rosie Waterhouse didn't do a PhD. Rosie Waterhouse spent 25 years campaigning and writing newspaper articles saying that Satanist ritual abuse doesn't exist. So she was saying this for 25 years. So there was obviously a lot of cases coming up for her to spend 25 years saying it doesn't exist. And she then put all of her articles in a folder and she submitted those, and that was the PhD application. Wow. That was the basis of it. It was her articles over the years that she considered to be such high quality research, right, and as to warrant a doctorate.
David, I'd like to just come in so quickly because I'm going to say that if our viewers and listeners today feel as outraged as I do about what the Daily Mail has done here, we need to do something. It's no good sitting at home being upset. It is get on the telephone, get on those emails, get talking to the Daily Mail. They won't let you speak to the journalists, of course, because they're anonymous. But get on to the editor. And of course, I know that Robert Greene is going to take this matter up with the press complaints. So what an irony that Daily Mail, that many people defended because, of course, the Leveson inquiry really went for the Daily Mail. We've now got the Daily Mail showing actually gutter journalism here. If you're unhappy, do something about it. And I'll just bring on this slide because Wilfred Wong, who of course is an expert on SRA, satanic abuse of children, and he pointed out that people should be aware that there is a section on it in the full report by Wiltshire Police. Apparently the one on their website that was initially put up was a little bit of a summary, but if you see the full public report, you will see these paragraphs detailing their very sensible and measured approach to the fact that some of these victims were indicating that they were abused in a satanic ritualistic setting. And Wilfred Wong says, if we want to get to grips with this despicable subject, then we need to look at bringing in laws against it. And he quotes, I think it is Idaho in the USA that has actually brought the whole subject of Satanism in front of the public. So, of course, it can be exposed and dealt with. And I better just end, of course, and say we have not forgotten that the British government approved Satanism for use on board British warships. And my question is, the decision was made not by the government, the decision was made by men and or women. Who were the women, who were the men who made the decision that Satanism was acceptable for practice on board Royal Navy warships? Who were those people?
Now, it's almost a couple of years ago, I think, David, you mentioned Cardinal George Pell, the Vatican banker, who had been on the receiving end of allegations for many years of, at the very least, cover-up of child abuse, but more recently, child abuse allegations themselves. He finally, a couple of months ago, went back to Australia from the Vatican in order to face these charges. And he has appeared in court this morning, or probably last night, UK time, and will go back to court for a full hearing in March to determine whether there's enough evidence for him to stand trial. And the question for the court hearing today was how many of the alleged victims of this man would be allowed to testify. And in fact, 50 out of the 55 people, witnesses, let's call them, are going to be allowed to testify at that hearing. So the various news outlets described him as being frail looking. He certainly wasn't frail looking a couple of years ago. He seems like he's frail looking now, but it's about time this took place, David.
Absolutely. We played the Tim Hitchens song, charity song, Come Home Cardinal Pell. So that's available on YouTube if anyone wants to go and have a wee listen to how Tim Minchin viewed his initial refusal to come back and give evidence about child sexual abuse within the Roman Catholic Church and what he knew. But when the allegations became much more serious, his heart condition, which prevented him travelling, seemed to moderate a bit, and he's now in Australia, somewhat to my surprise, actually. He went to Australia to face these charges. And it's going to be very interesting to see what's happening. It would appear that in Australia, the Royal Commission are running into these things is actually doing real investigation. They seem to be discovering facts and having the victims and survivors able to speak out and inform the nation what's happened and find some degree of justice. I just wish it was the same here.
Indeed. Okay, let's remind you all for one final time of AV 8.1, Alternative View 8.1, which you're speaking at, Brian, Patrick Henningson, Dr. Graham Downing and Ian R. Crane. That's in the Connaught Rooms in London on Sunday. Starts at 11 a.m. Doors open at 10:30. And a brief reminder of Froome Stop Wars Media on Trial event, headlined by John Pilger, with Peter Ford, Patrick Henningson, Vanessa Beeley, Piers Robinson, Tim Hayward and Robert Stewart speaking. That's on Thursday the 19th of October at Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church. Details on eventbrite.com. Tickets, I believe, are £9. In advance, £10 on the door. Please do get along to that. Sheila has said that any extra money that's made on this, any profit that's made on this will be going to help the situation in Yemen. So do get along if you can. What's next? Right, Catalonia. Well, yesterday we mentioned that the Catalonian Parliament would hold a session on this coming Monday to declare independence. Spain's Constitutional Court today has ordered the suspension of that session of the Catalonian Parliament, and the Catalonian leaders are continuing to make calls for independence and so on. But we hinted in the last few days, David, about the sort of similarities between the Catalan sort of demands for independence within the European Union and the Scottish situation. So let's start with this one. The headline is Nicola Sturgeon says 2 million Catalan votes for independence cannot be ignored, but it's not independence, it's an offer.
Well, this is Nicola Sturgeon. So hypocrisy central. This is there was a song by Alanis Morissette called Irony, and the only ironic thing about the song was that the person who wrote the lyrics didn't know what the word irony meant. This is Nicola explaining what irony means, because of course when Scotland had an independence referendum, 2 million Scots voted to stay within the United Kingdom, and within a year or two Nicola was busy ignoring the reviews. So yes, 2 million votes can't be ignored. Well, sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. There are many interesting things about the dynamics of this. It's shown the lack of interest of the EU in smaller nations and smaller peoples. Right? The EU is interested in its own power, in its own control, and the naive adherence of the SNP to their pro-European, their dramatically, almost sycophantically pro-European stance has been illustrated here by how the EU has approached the Catalonia problem, which has been to back the power interests pretty much and do almost nothing. And that's left the nationalists in Scotland somewhat nonplussed. One of the other issues is the whole dynamic of Brexit is driving nationalism into a corner, and that's something we can come back to another day. Perhaps.
Okay, we're rapidly running out of time here. Let's get on to the issue of the no to name person scheme, David, and you wanted to highlight this. Teachers and data sharing officials turn up the heat on named persons. Clearly, the court. The court result that you had a year or so ago from the Supreme Court is not bearing any fruit in terms of the Scottish Government, and so they're continuing to hold hearings on the Children and Young People Information Sharing Bill.
This bill is meant to sort the illegalities of the previous bill, which was ruled illegal and unconstitutional and out with the competency of the Scottish Parliament by the UK Supreme Court. So they've come up with an information sharing bill, and it's incoherent because what it says is, yes, you have to consider sharing information based on well-being, which no one can define. Just remember the expert in well-being defined it as well-being is not a beach you go and lie on. It's a sort of dynamic dance, and there's movement in all of that time, and actually it's the functionality of that movement which is actually true levels of well-being. Nick Marks. That's the official explanation. It's completely incoherent. And they must consider whether to share information on that, but they're not allowed to share information apart from on welfare concerns, which are much higher thresholds. So the whole thing's very confused. They're now holding hearings to try and substantiate that this is really okay. And the hearings have been with people within social work and education and health and all related issues. So this next slide here, this lady here, Jackie Nichols, she said, amongst other things, I actually had a presentation to a group of practitioners around a named person, and I think that they, to an individual, would say that yes, they can see the merit of a named person, but not for their child.
Isn't that hearsay? Isn't that hearsay?
Beautiful.
Isn't that hearsay?
And then this lady here was talking about the problem of this is EIS head teacher, member of EIS, Lorraine McBride, and she's talking about recruitment of head teachers. It's dire. People just don't want to do the job. And then the next slide you've got, I think, is president of the Scottish Guidance Association. She was asked what well-being means, and she says, I thought I knew what it meant until I heard that people didn't know what it meant, and now I think that I don't know what it means. That's what she said to the Scottish Parliamentary Committee. So that the hilarity goes on, the confusion goes on, and we're watching closely.
David, just very quickly, because I know about the time, but actually that is such a fantastic statement, because so many people are just listening to the words or looking at the words on paper, thinking they know the meaning of the words that the government's using, when actually they don't. And it's only when they say, what are they really saying, that you start thinking it through. So I know we've had a little bit of a laugh at the lady's predicament, but I'm going to stand up and say, I think actually that was a little flash of light there. She realised she'd been conned. She realised she didn't actually understand what she was being asked to support.
I think that's absolutely right, that lack of critical thinking skills, lack of the ability, the encouragement, the culture to ask questions and to really test these things allows bad law like named person to come in. And then when it is questioned, the penny starts to drop. And I think it is dropping. with this lady, with the EIS, with the teaching unions, they realise that they've been sold something that they really don't want.
Okay, well, we're going to end then with this news, which of course is that the White Helmets did not win the Nobel Peace Prize. That's good stuff. Instead, it was awarded to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And the Nobel Committee said that the 2017 Peace Prize calls upon nuclear armed states to initiate negotiations to gradual elimination of the world's 15,000 nuclear weapons. So that's a pretty unequivocal statement from them.
Well, I may be wrong here, Mike, but I think that that organisation, the Independent Committee to End Nuclear Weapons, was part of an EU organisation that retired Admiral Boyce, was part of.
Right.
Yeah, head towards the removal of nuclear weapons. This is not more safety. This is bringing in global control of the military and weapons. I think this is what this is about.
Okay.
Well, David, thank you very much for joining us. What amazing times we're in. All of this evidence coming out about Ted Heath and an immediate attack across the press and media. North of the border, we've got people so disgusted in the lack of movement into investigating child abuse that they're taking that forward themselves with Fresh Start. So well done to all those people. But I'm going to end today by saying once again, it's not enough to just sit and listen to the information that UK Column and many other people are pushing out. You need to act. And if you want to do something productive today, take on the mainstream newspapers for their despicable attack on child abuse victims and survivors who've had the courage to come forward. That's it for today. Thanks for joining us. And if you're not already a subscriber for UK Column, please consider taking out a subscription. We can only do what we do with your financial support. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.